A candle guttering at the edge of the abyss begins with silence that demands to be felt. The flicker of truth sears the quiet mind. Existence is suffering, clothed in illusion's finery. Sensations drift like dying petals, each longing a wound that aches beneath the skin of consciousness. In this fragile hush, the viewer's breath settles. Illusion trembles under the weight of seeing. There is no solace in the world's promises. Every ambition is a phantom, every desire a sketched self on sand destined to erode. The modern age preaches comfort as salvation, yet comfort is a cage built of anesthetic pleasures and shallow affirmations. We chase these phantoms, driven by will that knows no vastness, only endless hunger, only empty repeats. Yet suffering is not failure. It is the physician that enters through the door we often bolt. A pain unmasked reveals the socket of longing, how we grasp at the mirrored image of self, at connection, at continuity in a universe that dissolves at every moment. The script of the self is written in footnotes of loss, each breath breathless, each joy ephemeral, each relationship a mirror shattering into the void. Feel this, the intense ache when expectation dissolves. A marriage, a career, a child, none shield us from the void. The moment arrives and dissolves, leaving awareness alone. In that altar of emptiness, revelation dawns not as redemption, but as seeing. The will that pushes, plucks, consumes and devours is itself the wellspring of sorrow. To see that clearly is to feel relief. In honesty, resignation blooms. We weave memories into illusions of permanence, yet everything fades. Empires, love, art, the self. Each is a candle whose flame wavers in wind. In that flicker, there is a strange beauty. Beauty not in the object, but in its transience. The breath that dissolves, yet persists in noticing. This noticing is the true subtle light. The false promise of modernity is that technological triumph, aesthetic perfection, and constant novelty will banish suffering. But novelty itself is fleeting. Perfection turns brittle. Underneath, the same ancient ache pulses. The will's dissatisfaction, the self-asserting identity, exclusion, permanence, all fall under the long shadow of mortality and meaninglessness. Let the viewer feel the tremor of this truth every 2 or 3 minutes, the self shrieking in panic at meaninglessness, the solace of realizing there is no script, only raw presence. The release is not cheer, but clarity. A patient stillness in which the self unbinds from its narratives. Here, in the black soil of being, compassion arises not sentimental kindness, but a quiet witnessing. You see suffering in its fullness, yours, mine, all beings. You carry no illusions of change or improvement, only recognition. Recognition itself softens the will's dagger, for when the will recoils from desire, the dagger loses its edge. No escape remains. Every escape is a flight from awareness, a return to darkness. But direct seeing the will deceives, the illusions fade, the self dissolves, becomes the pathless path, not movement, but presence. Presence that knows there is nowhere else to go, nothing to do, nothing to become or be. In this moment, the script, the monologue wanders not to entertain, not to soothe, not to promise, but to reveal. Desire is the heart of suffering, and suffering is the root of seeing. As the monologue breathes, the melody is in its restraint, truth in each pause, wisdom in each ache. There is no crescendo, only deepening. Pain becomes a teacher. Pain lenses the ego, but in the cut, the wound reveals light. Awareness, witnessing agony, without grasping, without recoil. The self forgets itself, melts into witnessing. The script's voice is the physician, though no prescriptions are offered, only the quiet showing of what is. The viewer becomes the viewer of illusion, the sovereign of stillness. There is a clarity that comes from surrender, the surrender not to hope, but to what is. The paradox is subtle. Surrender is not defeat, but seeing. Yet the will cannot grasp it. The will is always reaching. So seeing arrives only when will pauses in resignation. In that pause, the self is unmade, and space opens. Nothing is wanted, nothing is feared. Everything simply is. In that simple is the everything. Not triumph, not ecstasy, not enlightenment as concept, but a quiet recognition. existence breathing in its own emptiness, thinking in its own cavity. The monologue dissolves into final silence that is not absence, but unbounded presence. The deeper one peers into the eyes of suffering, the more one recognizes the grim face of existence. It does not scream, it sighs, not in rage, but in resignation. Every being is born into the quiet machinery of decay, where pleasure flickers briefly and pain anchors with constancy. The world, taken without illusion, is not cruel by intent, but indifferent by essence. It grinds not out of malice, but necessity. Life devours itself, and in this endless consumption, the soul stirs disoriented, aching, asking why. What is the self but a ripple in the pond of will, a mirage of continuity formed by memory and desire? It clings to its image in desperation, believing in identity as salvation. Yet each night it vanishes in sleep, and each moment it shifts like shadow. What clings so fervently has no edge, no core. We suffer because we grip the ungrippable, name the unnamed, build homes in wind. The self is a story stitched with pain, and to know it fully is to watch it fray into silence. Desire whispers of fulfillment, but it only breeds more wanting. Satisfaction is an echo, soft, fleeting, and gone before it settles. No joy remains unpierced by the thought of its end. Even love, the noblest of our illusions, is marred by longing, possession, and fear. We name it eternal, yet mourn it while it still breathes. In truth, we do not want love. We want to be free of the emptiness that comes when we are alone with ourselves. Modern life, dressed in light, conceals a deeper darkness. It masks the old gods of pain and loss with glowing screens and endless distraction. It tells the soul to run, to shop, to perform, to produce, but never to pause. Never to look into the mirror when the paint peels. Yet the peeling reveals. In that slow erosion, we see the futility of our becoming. We are not here to become, but to endure with grace the burden of being. Every path taken to escape the sorrow only brings it nearer. To numb the ache is to deepen it. To outrun death is to be haunted by every tick of time. The only way out is in. Inward, where the world is no longer a stage, but a whispering wound. To sit with the ache is to strip the soul of ornament and ambition. What remains is not nothing, but everything, veiled in stillness, untouched by the hunger of will. Detachment is not indifference. It is clarity. It is seeing the world as it is, without embellishment or demand. One does not cease to feel, but to grasp. To suffer becomes no longer a curse, but a condition of clarity. Even in agony, there is lucidity, if one ceases to turn away. To turn towards suffering is to see beyond it, not into hope, but into truth. And in truth, peace is not the absence of pain, but the absence of illusion. Let the world burn its promises to ash. Let the heart break not once, but endlessly. Each fracture is a window, each loss a letting go. The soul grows not by gaining, but by being stripped. In that bareness, it breathes. It no longer demands. It no longer yearns. It watches, quiet, with eyes that no longer seek salvation. And slowly, even suffering becomes sacred. Not because it uplifts, but because it unveils. In its shadow, the soul is no longer deceived. It no longer looks for meaning in movement, or freedom in desire. It rests in the barren field, where nothing grows but awareness. And that is enough. That is all. The voice does not grow louder. It sinks. It descends into deeper stillness. The world spins, the flesh ages, the names fade. And yet, beneath it all, there is something that does not tremble. Not a God, not a purpose, but a quiet that asks for nothing, expects nothing, fears nothing. It is not the end. It is the end of wanting. And so, at last, there is peace. There are moments when the veil slips brief, piercing instants when the theater of the world goes dim, and one sees the strings, the scaffolding, the dust settling on forgotten masks. These moments do not announce themselves with grandeur. They arrive quietly, in the pause between thoughts, in the loneliness of a crowded room, in the stillness after a loss has stolen its final word. In that hush, existence speaks not with clarity, but with weight. the weight of being a pressure. The soul feels even before it learns to name. The body carries its own sentence. Each heartbeat is a drum of eventual collapse. To be born is to be flung into a slow dissolution, clothed in flesh that ages by the hour. Joy is permitted only to the extent that it can remind us of what will be taken. Youth teases eternity, only to vanish like vapor. And love, perhaps the most delicate lie of all whispers of union, in a world defined by separation. All we love, we lose. All we build, we bury. Civilization itself is a distraction, an elaborate attempt to polish the chains. We name progress what is merely the rearrangement of sorrow. No invention, no institution, no ideology has yet undone suffering, only displaced it, rebranded it, buried it beneath more noise. The city is not a triumph over nature, but a concealment of our animal ache, and every comfort bought by technology carries the price of deeper spiritual famine. How few dare to see without turning away. For what lies behind the world's ornaments is a kind of abyss, not violent, but indifferent. An abyss not of fire, but of silence. The will, when unmasked, is found not to be divine, but blind. It reaches not toward light, but merely out of itself, repeating. The hunger we feel is not noble, it is mechanical, reflexive, and cruel. In its grasp, we call bondage by the name of purpose. And yet, in that recognition, something quiet stirs not hope, but awareness. This awareness does not promise salvation, it offers only presence. And presence, when stripped of illusion, becomes a kind of release. One no longer struggles to improve the dream, but sees it for what it is. Flickering shadows cast by a fire that does not warm. There is no need to run, no reason to strive. The game reveals itself, and the player no longer plays. Suffering sharpens this vision. It is the blade that cuts through every fantasy. Grief is not an intruder, but a guide. It bends the ego toward humility. When all one loves is taken or changed beyond recognition, what remains? Only the awareness that watched it pass. And that awareness stripped of name, desire, future, is the only reality untouched by decay. We do not need more meaning, we need less illusion. Meaning, as it is commonly conceived, is another form of grasping, another garment thrown over the skeleton of the real. What frees is not the adoption of a new narrative, but the abandonment of all narratives. In that nakedness, the soul is neither empty nor full, it simply is. See the world not as it appears, but as it endures. Mountains crumble, oceans retreat. The stars themselves flicker toward extinction. Why then should we expect permanence in love, in identity, in purpose? The wise do not cling, they attend. They sit beside impermanence, like one sits with an old friend, no longer asking it to stay, no longer fearing its leaving. Even the will can be quieted not by force, but by exhaustion. The exhaustion not of despair, but of finally seeing. When one has chased every hope and found each one lacking, when one has loved and watched love turn cold, when one has sought and found only mirrors, then and only then does the will begin to loosen. In that loosening, detachment is born. Not coldness, but freedom. Not indifference, but repose. Do not seek to be understood. Do not seek to be fulfilled. These are the cries of a mind still tethered to illusion. Instead, become still. Watch the world pass like a river of dreams. Let the pain flow through without naming it. Let the joy rise and fall without clutching it. What remains is not less of you. It is the you that was always beyond the veil. And so the soul learns to walk without destination, to speak without need, to exist without becoming. It no longer bargains with time. It no longer argues with fate. It simply abides, like wind over stone, like shadow on water, unmoved, unbroken, unseen. This is not peace as the world knows it. It is the peace of having ceased to pretend. The peace that comes when one wants nothing, fears nothing, and therefore is everything the world is too restless to become. The soul that has seen through the veil does not speak loudly. It whispers, because it knows that truth, once unadorned, no longer needs persuasion. It no longer preaches in the marketplace or pleads with the unawakened. It simply withdraws, not out of bitterness, but out of clarity, like a bird that no longer sings because it has learned the language of silence. There, in the solitude stripped of yearning, something deeper than happiness is born. The world will go on, spinning its illusions. People will continue to chase what flees and fear, what never comes. They will name their emptiness, ambition, and their agitation purpose. They will call their distractions love and their attachments identity. It cannot be otherwise. The wheel of suffering turns because the will demands it. As long as desire remains, the cycle does not end, it merely shifts its masks. To understand this is to feel no contempt, only distance. You watch without intervening, as one might watch the tide retreating from a shore of broken shells. No scream will stop it. No hand can reverse the pull. The sea returns to itself, just as every being must, stripped of its borrowed forms. All that is held will slip. All that is believed will unravel. Even memory decays, leaving only the quiet trace of having once been. What then is left, if not despair? Not salvation, but sobriety. The sobriety of standing amid ruins without the impulse to rebuild. The wisdom of no longer seeking in the world what it cannot give. That wisdom does not console, but it clarifies. And in that clarity, a subtle contentment arises not from having, but from ceasing to need. The will, exhausted, does not die, it softens. It no longer reaches, but watches. In its watching, it becomes something else, something the ancients knew but the moderns have forgotten. Equanimity, the stillness that comes not after the storm, but within it. A flame that does not burn, but simply glows. There is no need to resist the world. For the world is not an enemy, it is simply not what we thought it was. Every encounter is a passing. Every intimacy is a farewell in disguise. When you kiss a lover, you are kissing a ghost. When you hold a child, you are holding impermanence. Nothing you love belongs to you, not even the body that carries your name. This is not a reason for despair, it is the very texture of beauty. What is temporary cannot be possessed, only witnessed. And in witnessing, without claim, one becomes free. It is not the suffering that breaks us, it is the refusal to suffer. The insistence that life be otherwise is the root of all unrest. Once that insistence dissolves, pain remains, but torment ceases. Pain is merely sensation, torment is interpretation. Strip away the story, and pain becomes a breath, a moment, a wave passing through the ocean of being. No longer resisted, it becomes part of the rhythm. No longer feared, it loses its sting. Freedom is not in choice. Freedom is in cessation. The cessation of wanting, of chasing, of clinging to the idea that something must complete you. You are already complete in your incompleteness. You are the echo of a silence deeper than time. There is nothing to become because there is nothing missing. What is missing is the illusion of lack. The sages of old sat beneath trees not to escape the world, but to see it rightly. They withdrew not from duty, but from delusion. They did not speak of love as possession or joy as a product. They spoke of liberation as the end of striving. And even that liberation was not an achievement, it was a homecoming, a return to the self before the self began to dream. We walk this path not to find something new, but to lose what was never ours. Each loss is a step, each grief a shedding, until finally there is no one left to walk. Only presence remains silent, still, awake. The world continues, but you are no longer in it the same way. You do not turn away, but you are no longer entangled. You see through it, and so it cannot bind you. This is what it means, to want nothing, to fear nothing, and in that absence, to be everything. The wind that circles an empty plain does so without longing, without expectation. It glides across barren earth the way awareness drifts through suffering carried, not by force, but by necessity. In that drifting, there is neither sorrow nor joy, only the motionless fidelity to what is. Suffering becomes the landscape upon which consciousness moves, never resisting, never seeking refuge. Every form dissolves over time. Empires crumble, bodies sag into dust, memories fray like pages left in rain. When one understands this at the level of being, one no longer mistakes form for fullness. A stone beside the road, a dying leaf on the wind, a single breath, these are not whispers of what was, but markers of what never ceases, the silent unfolding of existence itself. Illusion is the veil that blinds us to this unfolding. The moment the veil lifts, there is no actor left on stage, only the stage, empty and unwavering. The self, a fragile construct of desire and fear, unravels under the weight of seeing. The ego insists on permanence. It draws boundaries, collects experiences, weaves a myth of continuity. But the myth fractures, children vanish, beliefs crumble, loves fade. The ego shrinks under the glare of reality's indifference. And as it shrinks, something silent and vast emerges. The recognition that the boundless cannot be held by any boundary. To hold nothing is to hold everything. Pain, then, is not an aberration, but the medium. Do not recoil from it. Meet it with the stillness of a rock meeting a wave. The rock does not fight the salt or the tide, it remains. In suffering, we find not our limits, but our threshold. We discover where grip ends and release begins. We learn that to suffer is to feel without delusion, to be touched by existence itself, fragile, inevitable, real. Modern distraction is the fever suppressing a wound. Screens glow, voices clamor, schedules race, but the ache persists beneath the din. One may dance across the surface of life, but beneath lies the ceaseless pulse of longing. Running into noise only buries the pounding closer to the heart. To stop, to pause, even in discomfort, is to expose the underlying rhythm. That rhythm is not chaos. It is the stillness that sustains noise, the ground beneath spasms. In that stillness, suffering loses its tyranny. To detach is not to withdraw from humanity. It is to see humanity as it is. A multitude of echoes, desires, illusions, each quivering with its own pain. One stills the impulse to rescue, to cure, to fix. One simply witnesses. One leans into the sorrow not with pity but with clarity, empathy without expectation, presence without intervention. That witnessing itself dissolves the separation. For in clarity there is no subject who helps, and no object who is helped, only the one seeing the scene. Illusion wears many masks: glory, success, love, identity. Each mask invites you to believe you are more than suffering. But suffering is not the opposite of success or love. It is their soil. It nourishes longing, it enlivens attachment, it calls for meaning. When you see the masks all wear the same thread of longing, you understand. You are not seeking forms, you are caught in the absence. Those forms promise to fill. To detach is to step behind the theater curtain and look into the machinery. The theater continues without you. You remain in its periphery, unmoved, unseen, whole. There is a subtle release in confronting despair without fleeing it. Let it deepen, let it echo. Do not soften it with hope, do not distract it with distraction. Allow the ache to stretch across your field of vision. In that stretch, awareness widens. You see how suffering shapes relationships, institutions, narratives. You see how it drives industries built on numbing, how it fuels endless striving. The more you look, the clearer becomes the pattern. The will's ceaseless search is the core of all movement. Release the will's claim on your life, and movement subsides. In this subsidence, peace arrives not as exaltation, but as the absence of agitation. Willlessness is not defeat, it is the cessation of turmoil. When the will is not silenced by force, but dissolves of its own accord, when exhaustion of striving reveals the futility of its pursuit, then a deeper current emerges. That current is not under your control. It carries no purpose. Yet within it is a stillness that does not age, does not falter, does not ache. It is not found in attainment, but in relinquishment. This relinquishment is not a surrender to despair, but a surrender to seeing. It does not mean giving up life, but giving up the insistence that life must be other than what it is. It does not mean walking away from the world, but walking into it clearly as one steps into rain, not expecting dry skin, but blessing each drop. When you accept the wound becomes transparent. You see through it. Beyond it lies nothing sacred except what is already present. What remains is unshakable. It is not spirit or soul as taught, but silence unspoken, depth unmeasured. This silence is not empty, it is full of what discourse fails to touch, awareness itself. In that awareness, suffering is not removed, but the self that suffers is seen as suffering, no longer separated, no longer isolated. The pain pulses, but you are not it. You are the beholder of it, the sky above the storm. In the final breath of the monologue, there is no uplift, there is no proclamation. The voice descends into stillness until it quiets entirely. The wind brushes the page of time, turning it. Empires rise and fall, flesh ages, memory dims, but the silent witness remains always already quiet, always already here, not apart from suffering, but untouched by it. The candle guttering at the edge of the abyss stands not to illuminate, but to be, and in being, it glows with a light that wants nothing, fears nothing, and therefore contains everything simply because it has ceased to wonder. There comes a moment when the silence becomes more articulate than all words, when even thought bows before the unutterable weight of presence. No longer straining to understand, no longer resisting the currents of existence, one simply stands like a tree in winter, bare yet alive, stripped yet whole. In this bareness, there is no need to explain, no hunger to resolve. The soul, having wandered through pain, through illusion, through the thousand masks of becoming, finally rests in the stillness of what remains. The world, once seen clearly, no longer demands interpretation. It unfolds like a slow twilight across a forgotten plain, beautiful not because it promises anything, but because it asks for nothing. Every face becomes a passing cloud, every voice a ripple on the surface of deep water. All that we once feared to lose has already vanished, and all that we once struggled to become was always a shadow cast by longing. Here, in the dim and holy quiet, the self dissolves not in death, but in transparency. It becomes the window through which the world is seen without distortion. Not a figure, but a field. Not a story, but a silence. The heart no longer beats for a future. The breath no longer reaches toward a hope. All forward motion ceases, and in its place, presence, bare and entire. This is not enlightenment as the world speaks of it. It is not triumph or transcendence. It is not a crown worn by the ego. It is the vanishing of need, the disappearance of striving. It is the moment the wave realizes it was never separate from the sea. Suffering does not vanish, it loses its center. Pain may still pass through, but it no longer finds a name to cling to, a person to torture, a future to threaten. Grief still echoes, but the echo is hollow, and the hollow is holy. The one who once cried out has become the silence that listens, and the silence is enough. Even joy, when it comes, is no longer a conquest. It is a breeze, a shadow, a reflection on still water. It does not awaken hunger, it does not promise return. It simply is, and it leaves without regret. For the soul that no longer clings does not grieve departure. It watches all things arrive and depart with the same still eyes. And so one learns not to be more, but to be less. Less entangled, less certain, less noisy. Until only the essential remains. Awareness without center, presence without need. A flame without heat, a light without desire. There is no final revelation, no curtain drawn back, no hidden hand to bless the weary. There is only this, the breath, the fading light, the stillness after the final word. And in that stillness, no self survives to speak it. Want nothing, fear nothing, be everything.